Hi, I'm making a surreal open-world mystery game set in the New Mexico desert. It's called Ways Unknown. It's inspired by a genre of games sometimes called Metroidvanias, where new areas and abilities are unlocked by learning something about the game's world. Probably the biggest influence on Ways is 2019's Outer Wilds, which is why I like to call the genre Wilds-like. Today, I'm going to catch you up on the development of the art style of Ways Unknown. In the beginning, I don't even know what kind of game this will be, so I start by choosing a game engine. For my previous games, I wrote my own engine, which made some things easy and other things very difficult. I don't have time for that anymore, so that option is not on the table. The next option is Unity. I had written a few small games in Unity, and a couple years ago when I started, they still had some credibility, so I downloaded it. Actually, I download the downloader. Then I create an account, verify my email address, sign into the downloader, sign an end-user license agreement that was soon to change drastically, pick the version that seems best to me, download it, install it, and it crashes. So I try Unreal Engine 5. Very similar process, but once it's installed, I have to leave it running overnight to compile all the shaders, and when it finally finishes, the frame rate is about 1 frame per second. This experience nearly extinguishes whatever spark of joy I have left for game development. Then, right around January of 2023, I start playing with Godot. The big 4.0 release is in beta. Within 5 minutes, it's running on my machine, and it's beautiful. To be fair, it crashes just as often as every other engine I've ever used, but this time I can actually read the code and fix it. I contribute my first fix in May, a one-line change. I've never been more proud. And the spark is relit. For the next few months, I put the art style on the back burner and focus on gameplay. I still don't really know what the game is at this point, and I'm still getting familiar with Godot. I spend a lot of time figuring out what it can and can't do, and messing with the post-processing settings. One thing I've always wanted in a game is beautiful dynamic lighting. Godot has a dynamic global illumination system called SDFGI. Sometimes it works like magic, and other times it looks like garbage. I spend a lot of time figuring out how to play to its strengths and hide its weaknesses. Assets are something new for me. Back when I started learning game development as a kid, assets didn't really exist. I learned everything from library books. But if you're a game developer these days, sooner or later you will struggle with assets. Here's how it usually goes. In the course of development, I discover that I need a 3D model, maybe something simple, a prop like a tree or a bird. I type it into Google, and the first thing that shows up is 7,000 times better than anything I could ever do. My imagination starts going wild. The art style doesn't quite match anything else in the game, but if this is the kind of quality that's available, maybe it's best to just throw everything else out. Suddenly, I'm reconsidering everything. It doesn't matter that this asset sets a quality bar so high that I'll never be able to create anything to match it. It doesn't matter that the model has 1.7 million triangles and my browser can barely render the preview. I can decimate it in Blender. How much does this thing cost anyway? 37 cents? 3 hours later, all the assets in my game have been completely replaced with enormous 3D scanned PBR assets. Of course, I can't find assets that fit exactly what I need, but that's okay, I just redesigned the entire game around the ones I found, and it's beautiful. This makes for a really cool demo, but I quickly realize it's not practical to do the entire game this way, especially the environment. I need to be able to edit the level, move things around, and with assets I'm really constrained by the specific shapes of the assets I can find. A lot of them only have one side, so you have to think really hard how to combine them in a way that won't show any holes. And if you do manage to pull that off, the result looks a bit like a Frankenstein monster, and it's not very performant. That said, it is stunning to me that in 2025 I can search for almost any 3D model I want, and at least half the time I can find a free, realistic, high-quality, optimized PBR model in Blender format. The rest of the time, maybe it costs $5 or I need to convert it from FBX or something. For someone who started out typing in OBJ vertex coordinates in Notepad by hand, this is absolutely mind-boggling. And this experience solidifies for me that the art style of the game can't really be strongly stylized, so that when I need an asset I can't make myself, I can at least maximize the chances of finding something viable online. I can't use assets for the terrain. I need a custom solution. First, I try the hard way. I create a grid and start dragging points around. I'm terrible at UV mapping, so I find an option in Godot called triplanar mapping that works well enough for terrain as long as the texture is relatively uniform. This works fine until I need to make changes. I have to manually cut and weld vertices together, and the further I get from the original grid, the worse my topology becomes until eventually it gets so bent out of shape that I need to start over. Enter Bool tool. With a few keystrokes, I can take two shapes and subtract, intersect, or union them. The two shapes disappear and you get a brand new shape. But the real power comes when I use brush mode. In this mode, the original shapes stay around, though one of them becomes transparent. I can move the shapes around and even edit them, and Blender automatically recalculates the Boolean operation. And these brushes are stackable, so I can add and subtract multiple shapes. This approach is called constructive solid geometry, and it can take a bit more time to set up than just winging it freehand, but it's absolutely worth it. When I'm making a game, I find myself constantly adjusting and redesigning things. The game evolves, players give feedback, things change. At some point, I will inevitably realize the player jump needs to be twice as high, and suddenly all my levels have to be redesigned. With Bool tool, I can move an entire valley 3 feet to the left in just a few seconds. This would have taken me hours to do by hand. Bool tool also works in combination with geometry nodes, which allow me to construct a machine that generates geometry. Similar to Bool tool, they save me a ton of time by automatically regenerating everything when I change something. It's a lot like programming, which is great for me, but I'm at the beginning of its somewhat steep learning curve, and most of it is still deep black magic to me. In addition to faster iteration, I'm hoping to use Bool tool and geometry nodes to create a distinctive visual style. They can create these really interesting shapes that are sharp and crisp, yet abstract. They kind of blur the line between hard surface modeling and organic sculpting. I like the idea that someone might look at one of these interesting shapes and think, is that man-made or natural or something else entirely? I ask myself that a lot when I'm looking at reference photos of canyons and rock formations in the American Southwest. With the combination of these completely accidental discoveries, I think I've stumbled on an aesthetic that resonates with me: Surrealism. I'm hoping that these unique, bizarre landscapes juxtaposed with carefully chosen PBR assets will capture a sort of surreal, dreamlike feeling. And also by complete accident, this aesthetic ends up matching the theme of the game. Ways Unknown is about a logical and rational person facing something they can't understand. If you can't trust your own mind, what can you trust? I think a surreal aesthetic provides the perfect setting to explore that idea. It's realistic with just enough logic-defying elements to make you wonder. But that's just my current idea. The interesting thing about this theme of not understanding is that the process of developing this project itself has followed the same theme. If I just think a bit harder, read a bit more game design theory, invest a bit more brain power, then I'll finally be able to make these vague ideas a reality. But that's just not true. Several times I've developed a huge overarching story and world design that makes perfect logical sense, and it just feels dead. After all, life doesn't really make logical sense, at least not to my puny brain, and I like it that way. The world would have to be a pretty simple, boring place for me to be able to understand it. So I'm trying to learn how to make a good game without leaning on my own understanding, which weirdly is the whole theme of Ways Unknown. If you can't trust your own mind, what can you trust? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Does any of this make sense to you? What are your favorite examples of surrealism? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to see how this particular experiment turns out, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you next time.